The thing we're all waiting for is, a newly established trading relationship with the US. Obama said such things like, you'll be at the back of the queue. Donald Trump said you'll be at the front of the queue. Joe Biden, I'm not really sure what he thinks of us this week. It depends. So I think that is where we're at. We want to know what's going to happen, but it's not happening at the speed that we want it to happen at.
George Monbiot is looking completely unimpressed. George?
Well, Nicola's question was, will we ever regain what we've lost?
That's right.
And the frank answer to that is no. I mean, the catastrophic combination of Brexit and austerity, the Tory wrecking ball, ripping down public life, ripping down civil society, it will take decades, generations to rebuild the fabric of our lives from that. Now, frankly, I couldn't give a monkeys about a US trade deal. It's pretty irrelevant. By comparison to what we've lost as a nation within our own borders as a result of these ridiculous, time-wasting, life-wasting policies imposed on us by successive Tory generations.
Do you think that the argument that was made in the referendum, and we don't want to rehearse all the arguments there, but one of them was made about proximity, that the EU is our closest trading partner and proximity matters in trade. Are we just not finding out that is now the case? Is that what in your view is happening?
Yeah, I mean, all the warnings were dismissed as Project Fear, but boy, have they been coming true.
Aaron?
Well, we have a free trade deal with the EU, and we're now adding to that with Japan, Australia, as you mentioned, New Zealand and other countries that we want to get deals with. And perhaps in due course there'll be one with the States, but as I said, I don't think we'll see that this side of the presidential election. But I reject what George says, as you'd expect. I don't think that, what he's obviously advocating is going against what the British people voted for. And I don't want to rehearse all the arguments of the referendum, because there's been countless phone-ins on this channel and others about that. But everyone who was trying to stop Brexit was essentially saying the people got it wrong. And if that's the position that George is taking, that's the position the Labour Party are taking, well, let's hear them say it, because I don't think my constituents got it wrong. I think our future is bright outside the EU.
But I think it's fair to say that people were comprehensively lied to.
Well, I think you'll find that the arguments that were made for Remain didn't come true either. We were promised a recession the moment we voted to leave in a referendum campaign, and a referendum campaign with multiple people on both sides, as Sarah said. No one can promise exactly what will happen. No one can promise that there will definitely be a trade deal with any one country, because it takes two to tango.
You did in your manifesto in 2019.
Well, we said we'd work towards.
You said by 2022 there would be a trade deal.
Well, you cannot promise what the other side will deliver. I mean, we negotiated for that, but it takes two to tango, as Alicia said.
Sarah?
As everyone has said, we don't want to rehash what happened in 2016, but it is a shame that this is kind of where we're at now, where we're looking at people having a struggle with the cost of living, mortgage rates being higher, rents in London being astronomically high, which is impacting many of us. And I can see why people are kind of going, look, we were promised all of these things in 2016. We were given this, hacienda of what life would be like as a Brexit Britain. And for some people, what they voted for hasn't come to fruition. So I can see why people are feeling a little frustrated, wondering why things haven't happened quickly. But then we've also got to remember, we've just come out of a pandemic. The last 3 years have been absolutely atrocious. Of course, things haven't happened as rapidly as we would have liked. We've had God knows how many prime ministers in that time. I think people just want to see some stability and for the economy to get back on track.
So I've just got to say, I was momentarily getting excited when you mentioned the hacienda, because I'm a DJ in my spare time. I thought, we're going back to Manchester.
Let's get ourselves to Manchester.
Fantastic. Dana, let me ask you, if the EU relationship is so important, and we're talking about this US trade deal, the fact that we haven't got it, George has talked about the fact that, certain untruths were told, perhaps, this is in his view. Why is Labour not being more open and transparent and clear about its position on the EU? What's it scared of?
I think the Labour Party is very clear that we had that vote in 2016. By the time of the next election, we'll have been out of the EU for several years. I don't think the deal we've got is the best deal, and I know that Keir Starmer has talked about improving the relationship with the EU. There was a lot of damage done around Brexit, and I think that there are improvements that can be made, but I think we've got to move on as a country. I don't want to spend the next few years rehashing the arguments that we had around Brexit. I spent enough of my life, arguing around Brexit and why we shouldn't do it. But I think now we have to make the best of where we are. I agree with George. we're never going to get back, I don't think, to what we had with the EU. And my constituents in Hull, we're a port city. Yeah. We trade every day with Europe. We know how important proximity is.
Yes.
So, my city, narrowly in my constituency, decided to vote for Brexit. But I think now my constituents are saying, well, this isn't what we were promised.
They've got regret. Sorry, George.
I find it frankly astonishing that even Nigel Farage can admit that Brexit has failed, but the Labour Party can't.
Yeah. But if Nigel Farage was here, and he can dial in if he wants to, he would say that it's failed because we haven't taken advantage, as he sees it, of the benefits of Brexit, or that could have been the benefit. There's been no Brexit dividend.
It was
and we're pussyfooting around.
Yeah, it failed because it was destined to fail. I mean, the promises could not be met, and some of the issues just weren't even examined. I mean, Northern Ireland, it's like after the vote. Oh yeah, what are we going to do about Northern Ireland? All these huge issues were not even considered by the people.
Well, the Northern Ireland one, I remember John Major and Tony Blair going to Northern Ireland to make this very point, didn't they? And it wasn't really focused on. Last word to you on this, Aaron.
So I regret that the way the Brexit process took place created so much bad will with the EU. I think it would have been much better if we'd had a better deal from the start, but that, to be blunt, was undermined by people who were actively seeking to encourage the EU to be tougher with us because they didn't want to leave us to leave in the first place. What we have now under Rishi Sunak, we have a bit of that stability that Sarah was referring to. I'm very impressed with what we achieved with the Windsor Framework under Rishi, and I think we're going to move to a much more constructive relationship with the EU, which is what we all want to see.
Aaron, to be fair, it was David Frost and then Boris Johnson that signed off that cack-handed Northern Ireland Protocol deal, which had to be undone by Rishi Sunak, wasn't it?
Well, we had to make good on the promise to the British people, and that's what the 2019 election was all about. That's why Labour lost seats like mine in Newcastle-under-Lyme, because they basically put two fingers up to people who'd voted to leave, who voted Labour all their lives, and said, we know better than you. And maybe George is right. Maybe George is right that the Labour Party is full of people like that. I know there are plenty of Remainers on the opposition benches. I know that Keir Starmer went out before the last election saying there should be an option to remain. It's clear that is the overall agenda of a future Labour government, or certainly Labour backbenchers, because they all regret what happened. But I stick by the judgment of my constituents who voted to leave, and I think we can have a bright future outside the EU, but working with the EU.
Except that judgment has now changed, and we've seen the polls showing clearly that a majority of people would rather the Brexit vote had not happened. So you're not going to stand by the current people, but you're going to stand by the old decision, which people now regret. That doesn't make any sense at all.